We are fortunate to have with us today two nationally known subject matter experts. Thank you so much to Joe from the town of Garner for connecting us with Sarah and Laurie today. First is Sarah Quinlan, Managing Director of the Carolantic Fund at ANI Carolantic. Sarah comes to our region with a distinguished career advising CEOs around the world. You might recognize her from television. She has been a mainstay on CNBC, Fox Business Network, and Bloomberg TV. And now she's bringing her expertise to Garner. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Quinlan.
So I spent 28 years on Wall Street. I was one of those big bad hedge fund managers. I do apologize for 2008. Then I spent the last 6.5 years as the chief economist at MasterCard. So I got to see 160 million transactions an hour. And one of the things about that is you get to really understand consumer behavior. And one of the most important things to recognize is the recession of 2008 was different. It was like the Depression of 1929. It's the only time there was permanent wealth loss in the world and in the United States. And so people change their spending behavior permanently. It is not online that is the big change. It was fundamentally the fact that we decided the one thing that didn't leave us in 2008 was what? Our family and friends. So it is all about the experience and spending time with them. So I'm going to take you through a little bit about that in the economy. And yes, I know what's going on in the markets. Okay, so here we are. All right, so the key thing to understand is an economy is driven by three things. It's driven by retail sales, employment, and sort of the net migration into an area. So really understanding those factors are the critical things that you want to be thinking about. All right? But everyone keeps going, retail's dead. Everyone's buying from Amazon. So let me be very clear about this. Retail is not dead at all, whatsoever. And in fact, what we know is that only 10.2% of retail sales are actually done online. Did you know that? You hear screaming headlines about Amazon every single day. Amazon, if you look at their balance sheet, makes their money by renting out the web through Amazon Web Services. That is where their profits come from, not from selling you stuff, all right? So the average person in the United States, all right, lives paycheck to paycheck, and they get their paycheck and they go to a physical store and they shop. And then the choice of where they are is really the important choice, and that is driven by the experience they have there. And that is the biggest change. Now, e-commerce is growing, there's no doubt about it. But again, e-commerce requires a credit card. A lot of people are unbanked in the United States, but they still need to eat. They still need clothes. They still need all the things that we buy on a day-to-day basis, all right? In my case, I always need a manicure, right? So these types of things are very important to figure out as to where you're going to spend that money. So physical is not dead. What is dead is one big thing. Remember, I'm talking about experiences. And that is the fact that we actually are naked anymore. We really do not buy clothes. So you hear about like department stores not doing well, but the big thing is that they focus on selling clothes. And we just don't buy clothes. Look around this room. How many of you actually have a tie on? A few of you gentlemen look really fabulous, don't get me wrong. But the majority of people dress more casually now, and you can for work. So that difference between, for example, your weekend wardrobe and your weekday wardrobe is really not that different anymore. So you don't need double the clothes, right? So what are we doing? We're doing other things with it, right? So the key thing to understand is, look at this. 60% of US homeowners spend their money on services. So what do you do if you actually sell goods? You think about the services that pair with it, right? And that's why you start to see a lot of stores adding in other sort of like selling insurance or doing other things, trying to make it one-stop shopping. Now, for those of you, again, who thought that retail was dead, retail sales came out in the United States today. You're all panicked, when's the next recession? It's the biggest question I get on a daily basis. The reality is we are extremely fortunate that we will not be having a recession this year in the United States. I can honestly guarantee you that, unless there was absolutely a black swan event, all right? That the economy is really good. But remember, today retail sales was projected to be up 0.3. How much was it up? 0.7. In other words, we blew the number out. Walmart announced their earnings today and raised guidance, saying that they're going to sell even more by the end of the year. What does that tell you? It tells me that they're doing a heck of a great job, right? So retail isn't dead. And it tells me also that the people who are in the past 10 years doing the most challenged in terms of economic recovery are actually finally doing well. And we know that in the statistics as well. All right, so the other thing I want you to focus on is we love small business. 70% of Americans are employed by small business, and we prefer to shop small. We want to know somebody. You know, remember the old TV show Cheers? You walk in, Norm, right? You know, it's the same thing. We want to go and shop at places where we know people. So if you have a local business here, make certain that the same person is in front greeting people, that you know people's names. It's not get an email address, it's get a way that you would like me to communicate with you. It's that type of relationship, understanding, telling me, like, I truly, you know, I've never driven as much as I have to drive here, and you, by the way, are all NASCAR drivers, okay? So I just moved here. It's incredible. Like, it's incredible. I miss so many exits on I-40. But suffice to say, the reality is I'm not going to know when I have to change the oil in my car. And, you know, if I bought the car from you, isn't it nice if you actually contacted me and said, by the way, I've got appointments at these times for you. Does that work? Because last time it looked like that you don't have a lot of time during the day to do it, right? That's knowing, and that's what really makes things work, right? And this is a huge employer. We talk about the one thing that we know is prior to 2008, we lived on what's called OPM. What's OPM? Other people's money. We borrowed, okay? Now we actually live on what we actually make. It was a great lesson of 2008, right? So the point is if someone has a job, they're going to spend money. So the key thing we've got to focus on is making certain our schools do a great job employing people and in terms of teaching them to be ready for the jobs that our economy is going to be generating. And that's the key thing. All right, look at retail taxes here, right? This is what you want to see, right? When the tough gets going, the tough still spend, right? So the point is this is really the driver. If people are spending more and more, that's a good thing. Right? And that's the important thing, that's a great way to come in and you know, understand that one of the great things that brings businesses to the state is we have the lowest state corporate tax in the United States, right? But we still have to have roads, we still have to have schools, we still have to have all the services government provides. You got to pay for it somehow. So this is a good way because this is a voluntary tax that we all pay by the shopping, right? You know, obviously, we're looking at the retail here and the things like that, and understand that retail is the #1 business driving this place. So the more we can encourage retailers to come in here and offer the services and support those retailers, the more the economy in Garner is going to continue to grow. A couple things on the evolution of retail. One of the future things about retail is showrooming. So you actually don't need to stock your store with tons of stuff, all right? Think about our friends at Best Buy. Now, they were almost going out of business, right? Because you could buy a TV from Amazon. Why would you go to Best Buy? You went to Best Buy because you have no idea how to work that TV other than turn it on and off with a remote. Let's be honest, all right? We know this, all right? So the reality is you go in there, and the Geek Squad they created taught you how to actually use it and what was the difference between these. And then they actually even came to your home and put it in there. So they revived the whole business because what it is their store. Their store is not people actually walking out of the door with 55-inch or 70-inch TVs. You get that delivered. But you buy it from them online and get it delivered, or you buy it in the store and get it delivered. And that's the point. So the store turns into a giant showroom as opposed to actually doing things. So you don't need every size, if you do sell clothing, of things. You just need to know that you can get it to someone quickly. All right? So the other thing to understand very clearly is, I don't know if any of you know this fact, but did you know that the state of North Carolina is now the 24th largest economy in the world? We are bigger than Belgium. The state, okay? So really understand the power of the economic growth of what's happening here. Why is that? Because we did the really smart thing. We create the one thing that you can try to steal it, but we create intellectual property here, especially here in the Triangle region. right? And that is something that has the highest margin of profit. So therefore, we will continue to attract people to do that, as opposed to manufacturing, which came out with their stats today, is actually declining. So the key is not trying to bring more auto plants in here. It's trying to bring in, frankly, more software development companies, more, anything that's in that space that's understanding fintech that will really help drive our economy. It doesn't mean you all have to learn to code, because I can tell you I can code, but I sure as heck can't do any of the services that I spend my money on here in the region. So understand, we need people who do all those things, but it's a very important thing. But we got everyone moving in here. You know that 75 people a day move to the Raleigh region. 75 people a day are moving here. I moved here in March, right? So Garner, average household income, $60,000. Really important to recognize that it continues to rise. Property values rising. Very, very important thing. Home ownership. Don't always look at home ownership. I want to be clear. The American dream died in 2008. It's something we're seeing all over the country. People actually don't really sit and aspire to necessarily own a home, because remember, that's not how you're going to get wealthy anymore. You're going to get wealthy through other investments and liquid investments, and everybody knows that, because we now learned in 2008 that a house can be worth nothing. If you didn't realize that there's still over 11% people in the country 10 years after the recession whose mortgage is still more than their house is worth. All right? Try going to Orlando or Las Vegas. Perfect examples of two cities like that. So understand, that's not the definition of a healthy economy. So thinking about when you're developing housing, more things like multifamily housing, townhomes, things like that. Not everybody wants to, because two people in a family work now, and not everybody wants to mow a lawn all weekend long or take care of a house. So thinking about the changing thing, it's not a question of wealth, it's a question of choice and lifestyle choice, which leads everything. All right, so what's the outlook? Small business will continue to be there. We need to continue to encourage the banks and other alternative sources of capital to fund small business. It is still too hard in this country to start a business. It's still too hard, and not all of us have a rich uncle that can fund us, right? So the reality is we need to make certain that we as a town are pooling resources, thinking about starting a small venture capital fund, things like that, so you can actually support people getting that initial loan to get going. Very, very important. Understand brick and mortar is still going to be driving everything. You know why? It's because I like you. I like to talk to you, because what do I do all day? I sit in front of a computer monitor, right? That's what most people do for their jobs now. So that's not social. That's you and a machine. So people want to socialize. So it's really important. The showrooming is going to be really key. However, let me just quick address the markets. You might have had a heart attack the last couple of days on Wall Street and things like that, watching what's going on. You're going to continue to. Be very clear, you're spoiled little children after 10 years of markets going straight up, okay? So let's go back to the reality. I used to make my money trading volatility, and I haven't been able to make any money doing that the last 10 years because things just sort of went up and up. Because why? All the central banks in the world gave you money for free. All right, and so the issue here to understand is there's going to continue to be volatility, all right? What we want to do is continue to create. The more we can actually create intellectual property that is worth a ton, the more we will continue to survive. The final thing to really understand is that we are the luckiest people in the entire United States. It's the fundamental reason why I moved here in March. And it's because we actually have a population. Because in the last generation, my generation, the baby boomers, we forgot to do something, and that was have children. Sorry. The reality is we were supposed to have 2.62 children per family to replace ourselves. We only had 2.3. Now, I don't know how you do 0.62 or you do 0.3 kids, all right? I haven't figured that one out. But the reality is we don't have enough. But here we do in the triangle, right? Because of all the universities and people coming in here who want to stay here, because of Wake Tech and the wonderful things that they do there, and because of the 7,000 people who muster out of Fort Bragg every year. So we are fortunate. We have the one thing that the rest of the country, and by the way, it's what China doesn't have, it's what Germany doesn't have, it's what Japan doesn't have. They don't have any kids either, right? And so this is the big thing. So the one last thing, I'll make one quick comment on China because everyone's panicked about it, all right? China is not a threat to us. China's the second largest economy in the world. But China grew very fast because they were a dictatorship and a communist government. But now they got to the hard part. Do you know what the average income in China is? $4,000 a year. So you hear about the rich 110 million who actually have a passport. Of the 1.5 billion, only 110 million can leave the country. Right? So understand they've done a great job, but now they have the hard part of how do you lift up the rest of the people in the economy. So they already have some real challenges that are going on, and we're going to be slowing anyway. We are not helping with the tariff war. So if you have one thing I would urge you to do, I don't care what side of politics you're on, but you all should write your congressman and tell them to get the pressure to stop this, because we are committing what we call an own goal by hurting our economy, which is doing great, by the tariff war, because it creates uncertainty. And nobody likes uncertainty, because the one thing, remember, 70% of the economy is retail sales. So if we stop having confidence and don't spend, then the economy will go into recession. There's no reason for us to do that because people are employed now. But the final thing you have to do, go shopping. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing with us. Now we see why she's invited to speak all over the country, right? Our next national speaker just flew in from Dallas to be with us here at Connect. She also shared with me that this is her region or her territory, so that made me feel a little bit better. I was like, wow, all the way from Dallas just for Garner? That's awesome. Laurie Pearson is Vice President of Sales with Buxton, and Buxton is the industry leader in consumer analytics. She is here to give us insights on how community analytics shape the retail landscape in communities such as Garner. Laurie?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? Perfect, great. I love your presentation. It warms my heart because I hear often that retail is dying and what do we need to do about it. So really excited to get to be here today to talk to you guys a little bit about the real estate market and the Raleigh-Durham market, but also more how retail is evolving because retail is definitely not dead. So thanks for having me, April and Joe. I really appreciate the opportunity to be out here. So we're going to talk about several things as we go through, but really my main goal here today is to educate you guys on the importance of having the right types of retail in your community and understanding your residents as consumers, because it is not that you have a political boundary that retailers are looking at. They're really looking at your trade area and how your residents spend money, how they live their lives, how they shop, where they eat. Do you like, you may prefer red wine, I may prefer white. And retailers really need to understand these types of things when they're making decisions to locate into markets such as Garner. So just to recap, overview of the state of retail, retail growth projections, some key retail trends that we're seeing. Sarah mentioned a couple of them, but I'm going to hit on a couple more that we're really noticing in the retail market. Tourism and how it affects your economic development strategy, because even if it's not visitors, you have transient populations from Fort Bragg you had mentioned. You also have universities. Those are what we consider transient population that move throughout your community, that spend dollars in your community, but it's not captured on a census. So how does that affect you guys and how can you support that? And then also implications of all the changes in retail and how you guys can be prepared as a community. So just really quickly, April mentioned I work for Buxton. Buxton is a consumer analytics company founded by retailers for retailers. We've been in business about 25 years. We've worked with over 5,000 clients across the country. We help retailers make site selection decisions. That's our main goal. And it's not on demographics. It's not on median household income. It's not on age. It's based on how people live their lives and spend their money. So people like FedEx, Marriott, Ford, Tesla, all of these organizations partner with Buxton to help them decide their next location because it's a huge, huge investment. We spend millions of dollars on data every year. We have data to over 116 million households in the United States, down to 7 people in a household. So a lot of times you hear retailers or people talking about block groups or zip code levels. We get way more granular to understand the spending patterns of consumers than just a zip code. Because we may live next door to each other, but we also could live our lives very differently. So blocking people together and grouping and generalizing like that is not getting retailers what they need to make decisions. Our team back at the office, we are a private organization, have about 140 people on staff. A lot of those people are our data analytics, data warehouse, GIS team that do all the background work of analyzing all the data that we purchase on a monthly basis. So, what is the state of the North Carolina real estate market? So I'm going to briefly touch on kind of what's going on in the Raleigh-Durham market as you guys see a lot of this in your area. We're going to talk about vacancy rates, how real estate prices have changed, real estate trends, and then also implications to your community. What is happening to vacancy rates? So fortunately and unfortunately for you guys, y'all's vacancy rates are very, very low, below the national average. I'm sure some of you know. So what that does is it causes real estate prices to increase. So you guys are right at about 3.2, 3.3, and the national average is about 4.5%. So what this means is that retailers, they need space. And so you're going to have to get very creative with your options, because if their first ideal spot isn't available, you definitely need to have a backup plan in order to show them that you're willing to help them succeed in the community. So vacancy rates are low. Your guys' vacancies stay on the market for about 8.5 months. The national average is about 10.5 months. So things are moving a little bit more quickly as well in the Raleigh-Durham market. Like I just mentioned, you also have real estate prices. Obviously, with low vacancy, real estate prices have increased a lot. And so you guys, at the turn of the cycle, average price per square foot was about $130. Right now, it's at $190, and that's over the past 12 months. So you can see how drastically these are increasing. And a lot of the reason that it's increasing is because the demographics in the area, the strong workforce, and so people are wanting to locate, as we've heard, in this area. And so there's a lot of good things going on in the community. You just have to understand how to be proactive and strategic about the types of retail and businesses you're recruiting into your market. We're going to talk a little bit about malls and how that has changed. You have your A malls, which you see a lot of malls closing down these days, right? Unfortunately. And you see a shift, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute on how the anchors are changing. You don't see malls with 5 department stores anymore and all retail inside. So the shift is a little bit different. It's more business-to-consumer type individual retail facilities. So we'll talk about some mixed-use retail, pop-up shops or shorter leases, kind of the showrooming that she had mentioned earlier, omni-channel retail, which is one of my favorite things, and we'll talk about that, malls, and then also the retailization of healthcare. And I'm glad that we have some sponsors that are in healthcare, because as you guys know, the urgent care type facilities are definitely things that you want in close proximity nowadays versus a large hospital. So mixed-use retail. This is changing, as Sarah mentioned, to more of an experience-based environment. People want to spend money on experiences and families, and she spoke to that, and she's absolutely right. So you're seeing Dave & Buster's or movie theaters become anchors of malls, where in the past it was a department store. So you're going to see movie theaters, you're going to see restaurants and bars, but the small percentage of that you see on the pie, that's retail. So whereas it used to be flipped, this mixed-use development is growing, and it's very, very popular right now. Pop-up stores and shorter-term leases. We heard a little bit about this earlier, similar to showrooming. Pop-up stores are very, very popular right now for a couple of reasons. Because national chain retailers can do seasonal type applications or launch new products in this type environment where they don't have to open a new store or draw people into the large store, because we all know that we are convenience oriented, right? We don't want to have to park and go in and walk through the mall to get somewhere. So these little pop-up type locations add flexibility and convenience to us. Also, shorter term leases. So if you're looking at entrepreneurs who maybe have done an online business and they want to try out a storefront and they've done their research, shorter term options give them availability to do that. But as you see shorter term options, you also see more negotiation in lease prices. So it's definitely something to be aware of. My favorite, omni-channel retail. I don't know how many of you guys do click and collect or order your groceries online and pick them up, but I'm telling you, it is a lifesaver. So this type of business right here, you're seeing a lot of. And while right now it's just 8.5% of sales, whether it be through retail or restaurant, you can see Uber Eats and DoorDash up here. It's going to peak out right at about 15 or 20%. So obviously there are things that you cannot get delivered to your house, i.e. getting your nails done, right? But there are ways that you being convenience-based, because that's how we are, there are things that we can do to make our lives a little bit easier. So you are going to see omni-channel continue to increase, but retail is still around. There are still things you have to go to the stores and do, and still things that we want to go out and do. So that will definitely increase some, but it'll cap out. Malls. We just talked a little bit about that. Malls are not your traditional malls anymore, right? You have entertainment-based concepts coming out. You have food restaurants lining the malls, and then you have a little bit of retail. And so ideally, at the end of the day, this is a win-win for everybody, the consumer, the retailer, the restaurant, but you have to find the right space and put the right concepts in the right space based on consumer spending to make sure that you get the full effect. And then also the retailization of healthcare. So the past was, the hub and spoke was the supply of people being sick and having to come to a hospital. But what clinics are quickly realizing is that we're gonna create the demand, and we're gonna locate into areas where people need urgent cares, where people need pediatric cares. And so they're gonna understand the consumer spending. They're gonna understand family size, if they have children, to put these types of facilities in locations where they're easily accessible in lieu of having to go to an emergency room at a large hospital facility. So, tourism. I know, just like I mentioned, is you don't really think about how transient populations directly impact your economy. And they may not necessarily a lot, but there's definitely an opportunity to capitalize on understanding what your visitors do when they're in the area and why it's important. So it's not only residents that live here, but also your daytime population who just travels here to work but doesn't live here. You also have visitors. This creates, all of these people create your overall customer or your consumer behavior. So it's not just people that solely live in the geographic area or the political boundaries. And so understanding from a trade area standpoint who draws, who comes and goes is very important to retailers when they're making site selection decisions. We do a lot of this data at Buxton. What we do is we identify what we consider mobile insights. And so this helps us identify the visitors. It helps retailers be aligned with consumers and understand what kind of markets they're getting into. And so this is just another way other than credit card transaction, because we all have 100 apps on our phone. So we purchase data that's running behind that to understand how people are moving and what makes the most sense for you as a community to start recruiting the right type of retail so that they're successful, so that you don't have vacancies, so that there's more tax revenue coming into the community and also creating amenities for your consumers. Implications for the community. So we kind of talked about real estate a little bit and vacancies, which you guys are familiar with. We talked about all the evolution in retail. Clearly it is not dying, it is just changing a lot. And so what communities have to understand is they have to be proactive. They have to be strategic. You have to really understand what's going on in your market and able to recruit effectively. And like Sarah mentioned, you want to give back to your community. You want to give back to local entrepreneurs. You want to be able to shop here and dine here. And so these are just different ways to be considerate of retail recruitment whenever you're transitioning to open up Garner to be the place to be. Prove that you're worth the investment, right? So you can call a retailer and say, we want you to come here, but why? Well, because we have the consumers that shop at your type of concept. That's why. We understand the data. We've purchased the data. We've done our homework. So the great part about it is that Joe can have all the conversations about why Garner is the best place, why you guys are easy to do business with, why you're business friendly. But at the end of the day, they want to know if their store is going to be profitable. So they may be looking at Apex. They may be looking at Carry. And what we have the ability to do is help prove that you guys are worth the investment to locate here, because you do have the consumers that look for that type of space. So create an inventory of available space. Just like I mentioned, your vacancies are low, so you have limited options. Somebody has to stay on top of this all the time. You have to understand what's out there. You have to understand all the movement. That way, if somebody says, hey, I want this property, and you know it's not going to be available, you say, hey, not available, but these are all the properties I do have that are available, that match up to your criteria of what you're needing to locate. Let's go look at them. So just know your area, know your vacancies, know what's out there and what's going on in the community. Closures, use them as a springboard for redevelopment. So malls closing down, Kmart closing down, I think that's what you just said. These are opportunities to get creative on how people are using these these big storage facilities now, or big warehouse type facilities, department stores, as different applications. So whether it's divided internally, whether there's markets inside, pop-up markets, there's a lot of different ways that you can reuse the space. So the community has to get together and have to talk about these things that they know that the community needs, don't have the space for. Get creative, use some of the bigger platforms that you have out there. Think about retail development holistically. So we talked about all the people that make up the mix of what is truly your customer, and is not just specific residents that live here. So understanding what tourism looks like, understanding what your visitors are doing, right? Maybe more people would come here if you had X. So understand what they're doing when they're here. Understand your customer profile. That way that when they do come here, they spend money, they spend time, they stay the night, because you have unique experiences that they can enjoy. Just like I talked about, pop-up shops encourage entrepreneurs, identify your visitors. So there's a lot of things. Consider healthcare. There's a lot of opportunities in open spaces for, we see a lot of Walgreens and CVS is closing down. Those are great opportunities to use retail for healthcare. So there's many things that you can do, just understanding what's going on in your community and being smart about your economic development effort. So that's Buxton, and that's how we interact with communities. That's how we engage, and that's how we partner. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you guys are understanding what's going on, what people want, how we can help you get what people want, so that not only your community is successful, but your residents are very happy. So.
Thank you, Laurie.
Sure.
And let's once again thank both of these ladies for coming and sharing with us today. We do have a couple of minutes, so we'll have a little bit of Q&A. I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor if any of you have some questions that you'd also like to ask. So we'll just start with this question. You mentioned, visitors that are coming. So can you give us some examples of how we can encourage these visitors to maximize the impact that they're having in our cities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so encouraging visitors is a little bit hard because you don't know they're coming until they're here, right? So really what you have to do as a community is understanding what types of visitors you're getting, where they're coming from, so those feeder markets. And so by using data, you can really identify what that profile of consumer looks like and target other ones to attract more visitors like those that are coming to your community. So you can identify and understand the data, but also use marketing efforts to capture more of like-minded people to come so that you have that consistency.
I would also add signage is really important, all right? I'm the newbie, I told you that. And if I don't know, you don't want to turn at the last second. You want to say if there's a retail district or this is where, really helping and making signage much more visible. Where can people park? Those type of things. All that will add to people actually saying, I'll stay.
Okay, very good. And Sarah, you mentioned, that the economy has been strong here in Garner, but what do you think the risks are, and how can we mitigate those?
So the biggest risk by far is the trade war, and the reason is that you all pay for a trade war. No one else pays a trade, because what happens is the company pays the duty and they pass it to you, all right? And that's literally how it works, all right? So there's no country bill that's sent to anybody and they do that. It's literally you're paying for it. So that's the biggest risk, because right now, prices are set by being a democracy, right? In other words, we can find, especially if it's a commodity product, we can find it at the cheapest place and those types of things. That's the great thing about the internet. It allows that discovery. But if you artificially now have prices set higher, all right, then people actually just change their behavior. But the point is they defer. So if people defer buying something and then the price drops, they all don't just come back and buy it. They've moved on to something else. And so that's the biggest risk. The second biggest risk is honestly if we don't really sit there and really think about wages for everybody, all right, and economic development. Because I mentioned the Walmart economy earlier and the fact and the importance of this, but the reality is what has really driven this last part of the economy that got unemployment down to such a low level was actually the bottom 1/3 of the population of the United States finally got a wage increase, which they had not had. And that money came 100% into the economy. They literally do it. I literally measured it in all the cities around the country, and I literally took the data and watched exactly what happened as wage increases happen. So the reality is that group of people, so really understanding why everyone sits here as a business owner saying, oh, I don't always want wages to go up. You actually do. Right? Because it actually, we want the velocity of money to speed up. So the more I, as in my business, get paid faster, then I can pay my suppliers faster, then they can, pay their workers faster, and it creates this circle. So the risk is that we interrupt that circle. So right now, all things are doing kind of well, and again, the real issue is we just don't want to put an impediment in our way, because especially here in North Carolina, where we've done things right?
That's right. Laurie, you mentioned the pop-up stores and how people are starting to utilize. Is this a trend that's still becoming popular? And also, I'm a big fan of omni-channel, by the way. I love ordering groceries online. If you have not tried it, you should. It is fantastic.
You got to do it. Yeah. So just like I mentioned, the options for retailers to do seasonal type offerings or new product launches, but also for entrepreneurs to be able to test out the market. So I don't see pop-ups being a thing that goes away. I just think that there are niches in the market where these are promoted and available. And so if people get more accustomed to the idea of supporting this way, shopping local, investing back in your community, that trend will stay and continue to rise. It's just an easy option. It's a more of affordable option for people to go to market with their product.
And that's a perfect way to approach, the Kmart that's closing and go to them and say, look, can we, you're going away anyway, you're going to have dead space you have to deal with to begin with. So can we put in a bunch of pop-up stores in here right now so it's not empty there, and then the building doesn't actually go down in value, the parking lot doesn't get covered with weeds, et cetera, and then you've got all these neat stores that everybody starts to test, and then a few of them actually will survive and then look for a permanent space.
Well, and then it's an opportunity at that point for an experience, right? Because you can have a lot of pop-up stores in that type of facility. And so people will go and spend hours there. So maybe food trucks can be outside. Like, you can just encourage these people that are trying to, start their businesses or continue to grow their businesses in this type of application instead of just solely thinking about a brick and mortar storefront.
And don't be thinking about retail as stuff. Retail is anything we're selling. So you saw a lot of service businesses around here. Remember, this is what's really going to continue to drive. The issue is, post the recession, 2 people in a family are working. So the most valuable thing to every single person in this room and in America is time. All right? So we sit there and think about what are we willing to pay other people to do. And this is really a part of how, and it doesn't matter what your income level is, it's really time and figuring out how you're going to allocate it.
Okay, very good. And you mentioned the food halls. We actually have 2 right here in Raleigh that are pretty close by. So there again, pop-up
Perfect
food.
opportunity, right? And to even just take a different stance in a different area, right? Just to see how it works. So definitely a lot of opportunity for that.
But what isn't working as well is grocery. So now, according to data, 48.7% of food spending is in restaurants. All right? Millennials are 52% restaurant, 48% grocery. And by the time we get to Generation Z, they won't even know how to use a microwave, okay? So understand, all right, the issue is not about, now everyone's excited about Wegmans coming to town. Wegmans because it creates an experience, but understand the biggest portion of sales in most grocery stores now is what? It's the deli with the pre-cooked food, because you actually thought you cooked because you heated it up, all right? So just remember this trend. It's going, and this is hard data.
And I would say that trend is true of my household, especially now that both of our kids have gone off to college. We don't cook at home as much anymore. It's easier to go out for 2. So, Laurie, what advice would you give for someone wanting to start a retail business?
Ooh, understand a lot but really understanding who your true consumer is and locating into a spot that's going to make you be successful because of that makeup. So, the old adage, location, 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 you could have the greatest location off the interstate, corner lot, visibility, great parking, but if you don't have consumers in that area that are going to shop at your concept, it's not going to work. And so now what we create is the consumer focus. So make sure that you are putting locations of stores and areas where people are going to shop or dine at your restaurant or get their nails done or whatever the service may be. But make sure you find that pocket of consumers that are going to help you be successful.
And Sarah, you mentioned the workforce a little bit. So we do have an aging workforce. How do we attract younger people into business? Employment.
You know, it's really interesting. I think the most important thing is everybody wants to work. There is this unfortunate perception that the millennials don't want to work. Now, I agree. They don't have an attention span, all right? But neither do you. You all look at your phones, too, all right? So the reality is, okay, the reality is what we have to do is create workplaces that they want to work within. And I think this is the point to really understand. You've heard the words creative office building as opposed to a regular office building where everyone has a cubicle and this and that. It's really sitting here. Remember how I said you're one-on-one with a machine, right? So the issue is where are we creating spaces where people can gather? It's thinking about an office building that has a much bigger atrium with, you know, perhaps retail in it, right? So people meet each other and then potentially are doing business with each other as opposed to you just come into a building, go directly to the elevator and go up to your office, right? So people are wanting to think about how, again, this live, work, play experience can all interact with each other. And this is really what we see, this huge evolution. I know John Kane's, you know, speaking later today. If you think about what North Hills was, right? And or Cameron Village, which came before it, right? That idea where people can live, work, play, park that car, walk around, see what's there, experience that, and interact with each other. And this is really what people want. And this is what's going to make Garner incredibly successful, the more you focus on that.
And Laurie, you did mention, you know, about the health care. So are we going to start seeing like urgent cares and healthcare facilities in some of these vacant spots?
Have you not already? I mean, I'm
They
surprised
are.
if
Yep.
you haven't.
Carytown.
But yes, absolutely. We have a lot of healthcare clients, CityMD, and some of the more quick serve type spots, and they don't need a big facility, right? They need 1 or 2 rooms, and so they're not looking for these big open vacancies. And like I mentioned, you know, Walgreens, CVS is a prime spot if they've closed down for healthcare to locate into. But healthcare is coming to the communities. They're not waiting on you guys to come to them. And so absolutely, if you haven't started to see it, our healthcare vertical that we call is growing drastically with what we're seeing and people wanting to identify, not the huge hospitals, but they're wanting to go out.
Well, the other thing to mention is, you know, we also are extremely fortunate in this region because we have 3 massive healthcare systems, Wake Med, Duke Med, and Rex, that are all continuing to massively invest. And what's actually happening is we are now getting people from around the country who are coming here for their health care. And so thinking about, this is a perfect example where Airbnb comes in, where people are looking to have a place to stay, and then they've got to go out and go shopping and do this because they're here for an extended period of time while someone in their family is having a medical procedure. This is actually incredibly beneficial for this community, and it's only a few places, Minnesota with the Mayo Clinic, Boston, that really actually have this type of experience, and we're very fortunate to have the 3 systems, frankly, competing the heck out of each other to try to be the dominant one, which they won't be. They'll just be all 3.
That counts as your transient population too, right? There is still movement. It's still drawing people here.
Yeah. And I think we learned on our bus tour this morning that there's an urgent care going into the vacant Applebee's. So
Yep, there you go.
And lastly, we do have some of our next-gen students here today. So what do you think are the top 3 qualities that employers are going to be looking for, specifically since we're talking about retail, but in the retail industry or just in general?
Okay, first thing, do not ask how much vacation you get as your first question. Okay, number 1. No, curiosity is what we're looking for. We're looking for people who are curious. We know you're another generation. We know you do things differently. But being curious about what we've been doing to be successful, because obviously if we're in the position to hire you, we've actually done something correctly, right? So coming in and assuming we got everything wrong and we got to change everything because we don't understand you, probably not the best approach. But coming in and being curious and then saying, I have this to add, right? I think that's the number 1 thing. The number 2 thing is really understanding that you really are not being hired for the corner office, right? And in other words, we still, no matter what the business is, unless, you know, you're Mark Zuckerberg, most people do not start and go that way. Everybody starts and has a learning curve and goes up. And then the third thing is we understand that you may not be with us for life. all right? But the issue is how you not only start a job, but how you leave a job is incredibly important.
Agree. I would say too, being a millennial, and thank you for defending our honor earlier, but the workforce has changed drastically since I've been in it, from very corporate to a very much more laid back environment. I'm in an open office environment now. There's glass everywhere. There's no queue. I mean, it is an enjoyable place to be. There's a lot of interaction. So while don't ask about vacation, you can ask about the work-life balance that you're going to get, and understanding that you also have to make a commitment to an organization for them to invest in you. So you're not owed anything at that point, and so work ethic is extremely important. Go in, work hard, and earn it, and then you will see and reap the benefits of organizations who are willing to invest in their employees.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience?
We answered them all.
Well, thank you both again so much. This has been so enlightening. I am certainly doing my part because I do love to shop for things and services, so I am helping retail here in Garner. So thank you.